when you think of the 1970s, right? When you think of the best overall player, you think of Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. You think of the most exciting player. You think of maybe Julius Erving. Who were the best scorers? You think of Kareem, and you think of Nate Tiny Archibald. You think of Bob McAdoo. You think of the Iceman, George Gervin, David Thompson, World B. Free. When you think of the best assist men, you think of, I'd say Nate Tiny Archibald. You think of Kevin Porter. When you think of the best rebounders, you think of Swin Nader, Moses Malone, Truck Robinson, right? When you think of the most revolutionary player, there's really just one guy that comes to mind. And that's Pistol Pete Maravich. Why? Because we hadn't seen a guy like Pistol Pete before. First of all, he was one of the first truly big guards to invade the NBA. He was 6'5", 200 pounds. Before that, most players his size were swingmen, you know, um, and shit in the 1940s, bordering on being a power forward. But 6'5", 200 pounds. Now you got a guy in the backcourt who is a shooting guard but has some point guard skills. Uh, Pete Maravich today would probably be playing the point. He probably would be in the role of a James Harden or Luka Doncic, where everything is running through him, and he probably, knowing pistol, would shoot the ball 25 times a night at least, and probably leading the NBA scoring or damn near. Today's game will be suited for Pete Maravich. The 3-point shot, the up and down pace, the the when you look at the fact that it's so prioritized on perimeter scoring now, everything's pushed out to the perimeter. Yeah, Pete Maravich will be an absolute beast in today's NBA. The game will be suited for him. The same way I think that if Drazen Petrovic was inserted into today's game, I think we'd be having a serious debate as to who is the greatest shooter of all time. But back to Pistol. Pistol was a big guard. He could score in so many ways. He could score in the paint. He could score in the mid range. He could shoot from distance before there was a 3-point line. Um, and he was a tremendous ball wizard. Tremendous ball handling. Could do amazing things with the basketball, behind the back passes, fake passes. Some of the stuff that Pistol was doing, you saw Magic kind of implement a little bit into his game with Showtime. The no look passes. Now we didn't see guys doing it on that level before Pistol Pete. He helped to really modernize the game of basketball. But in particular, I think that he injected excitement into the NBA. Because before that, before Pistol Pete went to the NBA, the NBA was starting to become a little stagnant. You know, Look, we all see all the old footage of guys dribbling with one hand, and you got a lot of young people say, "Oh, these guys aren't skilled." When in reality, these guys were handcuffed by some very archaic and unfair, and to me, quite just too stringent rules when it came to being able to do what you could do with a basketball. Now it's funny. Bob Cousy was allowed to do certain things with the basketball because he was Bob Cousy. He was box office. Vern Mickelson, the former Minneapolis Lakers great, complained in his autobiography that Bob Cousy was able to do certain things that nobody else was able to do, and I think he said he complained to the NBA. I don't know if I don't think the term was commissioner back then. I think it was president. I think he complained to the NBA president back then about why Cousy was able to do these things, but nobody else could do them. Superstar privilege. One thing I want to touch on too, before I go further. Bob Cousy, when he grew up, right, played against a lot of black kids. Okay, that was a lot. That was his competition as his skills improved. The same thing went for Larry Bird. The same thing went for Pistol Pete Maravich, who grew up in the South, even though he was born in Pennsylvania. And I want to touch on that because you can see the influence of playing against black players with their games, with their swag. You know what I'm saying? Luca, of course, played overseas, but then again, just because he played overseas, there are a lot of black players that are currently playing overseas as well. And you can just see the influence of certain things with their game. That's all I'm going to say with that. I don't want to get too controversial with that. But anyway, Pistol Pete Maravich was born in 1947 in Pennsylvania, but he grew up in the South. I believe he grew up in North Carolina or South Carolina. His father, Press Maravich, was a player in one of those old defunct temporary leagues, but ultimately he became a head coach. And he taught Pete Maravich the game from a young age. I think he was 6 or 7 years old when he began to instill in Pete Maravich the fundamentals of basketball. Pete would play long hours and practice for long hours, practice on his shooting, practice on being able to shoot left-handed, right-handed, left-handed layups, right-handed layups, shooting from all different spots on the floor, hook shots, you know, working on increasing his range, basic ball handling, free throw shooting. Then after he mastered the fundamentals, then he started working on other shit, the trick shots and all that type shit, to the point where Pete Maravich was damn near unbeatable when it came to playing a game of horse. When Pete Maravich was in high school, he was already seen as a young phenom. You know what I'm saying? And it was when Pete Maravich graduated from high school. He was already 6'4". He was already about 190 pounds, 185, 190 pounds. And his father, Press Maravich, accepted the job as the head coach of LSU. Call it nepotism, call it favoritism, whatever. Pete Maravich went to LSU, and he was the focal point of the father's offense in LSU. Famously, Pete Maravich set the NCAA, what was it? The NCAA, I think it's Division One scoring record. In 3 years of play, he scored 3,667 points for a 44 points per game plus average. Okay, which is phenomenal, absolutely phenomenal. That shattered the prior record. And what makes that so amazing is three things. Number one, when Pistol Pete Maravich played, there was a rule that no longer exists where freshmen could not play. It affected Kareem; he couldn't play his first year at LSU. I mean, excuse me, UCLA. It affected a lot of different players, uh, most everybody at that time. So his freshman year, he wasn't playing against that level. He had to play against lower level guys. So those numbers don't count toward his overall point total. So he could have scored an additional 1,000 plus points his freshman year. I think he scored something like 800 points his freshman year, but they don't. It doesn't count toward his LSU total because it wasn't on the same level because he was barred from playing on Division I level. Secondly, what makes it so amazing is that when Pistol Pete Maravich was playing, there was no shot clock, which meant that the game was much slower. Had there been a shot clock instituted in college at that time, the game would have been faster, even faster paced. Um, Scoring would have been higher. So Pete would have averaged even more points. And then third was, very important is that there was no 3-point line when Pistol Pete Maravich was playing. And an expert went back and looked at every game that Pete Maravich played in, looked at all the shots that he shot, and he estimated that if Pete Maravich was playing today for LSU, and he took the same shots in each game that he shot back then, instead of averaging 44 points a game, Pete Maravich would have averaged 57 points a game. 57 points a game. So this is another thing I always want to bring up. When we look at Jerry West and we see that he averaged 27 points a game, I want to bring up him more because I don't want to bring up some of these other guys because they were more post players. But if you bring up a guy like him, even Oscar, you have to wonder how many points would they have averaged today with the 3-point line? Because ultimately they shot and made some field goals, a lot of field goals from what is now 3-point territory. Jerry West in particular, because he was one of the bombers. You wonder if instead of 27 points a game, would it have been more like 29 or 30 points per game if he was playing today? The years he averaging 31 or 32 or more, would it have been closer to 35, 36 points per game? These are some things you do wonder about. Now, after his extraordinary career and time with LSU, Pete Maravich was drafted by the Atlanta Hawks, I believe, in 1970. And when he was there, he put up some good numbers. Um, but, there was some jealousy. Pete Maravich, when he signed with Atlanta Hawks, had a contract that was worth altogether nearly $2 million. That was a lot of money back then. Absolutely a shitload of money back then in those days. When you had veterans on that team that probably were only making 200,000 maybe a year at the time. So that was envy upon that part. Also, Pete Maravich's Pete Maravich's game, which was more flashy, didn't really mesh well at times with the more conservative play of the stars on that team, which were Walt Bellamy and Sweet Lou Hudson. Sweet Lou Hudson should be in the Hall of Fame, by the way. Um, his rookie year, he appeared in 81 games, which compared to later seasons, he was fucking goddamn Cal Ripken Jr. And he averaged 23.2 points per game, and he earned NBA All Rookie Team honors. Unfortunately, Atlanta Hawks did not do very well record wise. I think his sophomore year, his production was down. I think he only averaged 21 points a game his second year. No, actually, it was 19 points a game. And the Hawks had another disappointing record at 36-46. However, in this particular year, they qualified for the playoffs, and they lost to the Boston Celtics, where Maravich averaged 28 points per game that particular year. In Maravich's third season, he averaged 26.1 points per game and dished out nearly 7 assists per game. With 2,063 points, he combined with Lou Hudson to become only the second set of teammates in league history to each score over 2,000 points in a single season. The Hawks finished with a 46-36 record, but again bowed out in the first round of playoffs. However, the season was good enough to earn Maravich his first ever appearance in the NBA All-Star Game and also All-NBA second team honors. The next season, the 73-74 season, was Maravich's best season yet. As far as statistical achievement, he averaged only 28 points a game, second only to the great Bob McAdoo, and earned his second appearance in an All-Star game. However, the Atlanta Hawks, now starting to suffer from an aging roster, finished 35-47 and missed the playoffs. In the summer of 1974, a new franchise emerged in the NBA, the New Orleans Jazz. And they were looking for someone or something to generate excitement among their new basketball fans. With his exciting style of play, Maravich was seen as the perfect man for the job, being that, he was a great young player, a great young scorer, flashy, great ball handler, great wizardry with the ball, dynamic. Plus, he was already an established star and celebrity in the Louisiana area because of his phenomenal and historic play at LSU. He was a perfect fit. To acquire Mavericks, the Jazz traded 2 players and 4 draft picks to Atlanta. The expansion team struggled mightily in its first season. Maravich managed to average only 21.5 points per game and shot a career worst 41.9% from the floor. The Jazz posted a 23-59 record, which is the worst record in the NBA. The next year, the Jazz management did its best to give Maravich a better supporting cast. The team posted a 38-44 record in its second season, but did not qualify for postseason play despite the dramatic improvement. Maravich struggled with injuries and only played in 62 games that year, but he did average just a hair under 26 points a game and continued his crowd-pleasing antics. He was elected to the elected to the All-NBA first team that year. The next year, 1976-77, would prove to be the high point of Pete Maravich's NBA career. He led the league in scoring with an average of 31.1 points per game. And once again, you have to wonder what that average would have been had the three-point line been in existence. He scored 40 points or more in 13 games and 50 or more in 4 games. Including in that was a February 1977 masterpiece performance against the New York Knicks where he scored 68 points. It was at times the most points ever scored by a guard in a single game, and only 2 players at any position that ever scored more, Wilt Chamberlain and Elgin Baylor. Coincidentally, Elgin Baylor was the head coach of the Utah Jazz at that particular time. In that particular game, I think Pete Maravich shot 26 of 43 from the floor. And he fouled out, I believe, with something like 3 minutes to go in the game, 3 minutes and some change. So the way Pete was going, he probably could have finished with 75 points or something like that. That's how much he was going in that particular game before he fouled out. That year, Maravich earned his third All-Star game appearance and was honored as All-NBA First Team for the second consecutive season. The following season, injuries to both knees forced him to miss 32 games during the 77-78 season. Despite being robbed of some quickness and athleticism, he still managed to score 27 points per game, and he also added 6.7 assists per contest, his highest average as a member of the Jazz. Many of those assists went to new teammate Truck Robinson, who had joined the franchise as a free agent during the offseason. In his first year in New Orleans, he averaged 22.7 points and a league best 15.7 rebounds per game. His presence prevented opponents from focusing their defensive efforts entirely on Maravich and lifted the Jazz to a 39-43 record, just short of making the club's first ever appearance in the playoffs. Knee problems would plague Maravich for the rest of his career. He played in just 49 games during the 78-79 season. He scored 22.6 points per game that season and earned his fifth and final All-Star appearance, but his scoring and passing abilities were severely impaired. The team struggled on the court and faced serious financial trouble as well. Management became desperate to make some changes, so the Jazz traded Robinson to the Phoenix Suns, receiving draft picks and some cash in return. However, in 1979, team owner Sam Battistone moved the Jazz to Salt Lake City. The Utah Jazz began playing the 1979-80 season. Maravich moved with the team to Salt Lake City, but his knee problems were worse than ever. He appeared in 17 games early in the season, but his injuries prevented him from practicing much, and new coach Tom Nissalke uh, had a strict rule that players who didn't practice were not allowed to play in games. Thus, Maravich was parked on the bench for 24 straight games, much to the dismay of Utah fans and to Maravich himself. During that time, Adrian Dantley emerged as the team's franchise player. The Jazz placed Maravich on waivers in January of 1980. He signed with the Celtics, the top team in the league that year, led by rookie superstar Larry Bird. Maravich adjusted to a new role as part-time contributor, giving Boston a hired gun off the bench. He helped the team post a 61-21 record in the regular season, best in the league. And for the first time since his early career in Atlanta, Maravich was able to participate in the NBA playoffs. He appeared in 9 games during that postseason, but the Celtics were upended by Julius Erving and the Philadelphia 76ers in the Eastern Conference Finals, 4 games to 1. Realizing that his knee problems would never go away, Maravich retired at the end of that season. The NBA instituted a three-point shot just in time for Maravich's last season in the league. He'd always been famous for his long-range shooting, and his final year provided an official statistical gauge of his abilities. Between his limited playing time in Utah and Boston, he made 10 of 15 three-point shots, giving him a career 67% completion rate behind the arc. During his 10-year career in the NBA, Maravich played in 658 games, averaging 24.2 points and 5.4 assists per contest. After injuries forced his retirement from the game in the fall of '80, he became a recluse for a couple of years, and he seemed to be searching for something. Basketball had been his life, and now without life, Maravich became depressed and in despair. He tried the practices of yoga and Hinduism, read Trappist monk Thomas Merton's The Seven-Story Mountain, and took an interest in the field of UFO. We start over. He tried the practices of yoga and Hinduism, read Trappist monk Thomas Merton's The Seven-Story Mountain, and took an interest in the field of UFOlogy, the study of unidentified flying objects. He also explored vegetarianism and macrobiotics, adopting a vegetarian diet in 1982. Eventually, he became a born-again Christian, embracing evangelical Christianity. In 1987, he was inducted into the Naismith Memorial Basketball Hall of Fame, and his number 7 jersey was retired by both the Jazz and the New Orleans Pelicans eventually, as well as his number 44 jersey by the Atlanta Hawks, although these things came after his death. On January 5th, 1988, Maravich collapsed and died of a heart attack at age 40 while playing in a pickup basketball game in the gym at First Church of Nazarene in Pasadena, California, with a group that included evangelical author James Dobson. Maravich had flown out from his home in Louisiana to tape a segment for Dobson's radio show that aired later that day. Dobson had said that Maravich's last words, less than a minute before he died, were, "I feel great." An autopsy revealed the cause of death to be a rare congenital defect. He had been born with a missing left coronary artery, a vessel that supplies blood to the muscle fibers of the heart. His right coronary artery was grossly enlarged and had been compensating for the defect. Maravich died a year after his father's passing and a number of years after his mother, who had committed suicide with a self-inflicted gunshot. Maravich is buried at Resthaven Gardens of Memory and Mausoleum in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. I remember just when I began uh, watching basketball sporadically, 88, 89. It was around the time Pete Maravich, a little bit after he had died. And I remember all this talk about him, and that kind of piqued my interest in basketball. At the time, I was still watching kind of sporadically. I didn't become a permanent basketball fan until I think it was the 1990 season. But the more I read about Pete Maravich, the more I realize that he was a special, not only a special talent, but he was also a special human being and a good person. And he was troubled like, like a lot of us. He wasn't perfect. But at the end of the day, when you look at what he was able to bring to the game and how much he influenced later players, and later generations of players, and just what he provided to the game and how much that influenced, scores of players today. Even when you look at Kyrie Irving, when you look at all of these ball wizards, Tim Hardaway, when you look at White Chocolate Jason Williams, when you look at all these guys who are able to do all these amazing things with the basketball over the years, the grandfather of all that is really Pistol Pete Maravich. Well, you could credit Bob Cousy, I guess, a little bit, but it's really Pete Maravich because most people identify with that than some grainy white and black and white footage. So just wanted to bring this little biography of Pete Maravich to you guys. Great scorer, great competitor. Unfortunately, in his career, and most educated fans would know this, but listen to the Stephen A. Smiths of the world, you're not going to get this perspective. You can't win a championship with a mediocre roster. You just can't do it. No matter how much heavy lifting you do, you can't do it. And also, when you don't have help, in my opinion, it does shorten your career. I'm certain that if Pete Maravich played, if he was drafted by, say, the Boston Celtics, who remained a good team for most of the 70s, and then he was able to play into the Bird era, I would not be surprised if Pete Maravich was able to play 14, 15 years instead of 10. Just because of the fact that when you have more help, there's less wear and tear on your body. Yes, your stats may not be as gaudy, but, you know, I'd rather, when you think about it, I'd rather win 4 or 5 championships averaging 18 points a game than to average 35 and win none. Yeah, I got all these great numbers, but I've never won any damn thing. You know, that's not a knock on a great player who hasn't won anything because Dominique Wilkins, he needed more help. You know, Alex English for the era, he needed more help. Adrian Dantley, he came that close to winning the championship, but he got screwed in Detroit. So here's to you, Pistol Pete Maravich.